right here in this community, in this neighborhood, with this family and these friends, I can actually have an effect. So I think for me now, at this point in my life, doing what I can where I am is how I can affect the world.
Thank you for listening to the Interesting People You Meet podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Newground Financial. Newground Financial is a full-service investment and insurance brokerage firm that specializes in employee benefit plans, corporate insurance, and retirement planning. Newground Financial serves the provinces of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, Ontario, and Alberta. Find out more at newgroundfinancial.com. Thank you for liking, sharing, and commenting on the Interesting People You Meet podcast across all of your favorite listening platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. By doing so, you are ensuring that more great people just like you have the opportunity to hear from our guests. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
In this episode of The Interesting People You Meet, it was a privilege to speak with Jim and Margaret Drescher, former stewards of Windhorse Farm. In an inspiring and creative succession process, Jim and Margaret transitioned Windhorse to Ullnoweg Education Foundation, an Indigenous charity, in 2022. We're grateful for them sharing their lessons in business, leadership, and life. Enjoy the podcast. For over 30 years, Jim and Margaret Drescher stewarded the land at Windhorse Farm in Lunenburg County, Nova Scotia. They have been practitioners and leaders in the Shambhala Buddhist community for several decades, and as teachers and hosts have welcomed many to connect more deeply with themselves, with others, and with nature. In 2021, they transitioned Windhorse Farm to Ullnoweg Education Centre, an Indigenous-led organization in an act of reconciliation and a creative path for successive generations. Jim and Margaret, as wonderful friends and mentors, your impact on me has been enormous, and I'm very pleased to welcome you and host you on the podcast today. So thanks for being here and welcome. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you for the invitation. When you sent your invitation and your list of questions, it gave us a wonderful opportunity to explore and look at our lives in a different way through that lens. And we're both very appreciative for this opportunity to be with you and Nick. So thank you.
Yeah, well, we look forward to hearing more about those explorations. I'd love to talk a little bit more about kind of what brought you to Windhorse 30 some years ago, and really this most recent transition and what that has meant to you, and where you find yourselves today. So let's start with that, and maybe you could tell us where you're joining us from today.
We're in our dining room, which is really the same room as our living room and kitchen, and you can probably see the pots and pans behind us. And we have a better view than you do because we're looking out at a lake, which in colonial language is called Wenzel's Lake, which in Mi'kmaq is Atwomakok. And it's nice. It's a little bit cloudy. It's warm, and the animals are noisy today.
Lots of ducks on the front lawn. Tell us a little bit about how it feels to be neighbors, to be next door to what is now Asatulisk, formerly Windhorse Farm. And you haven't moved far, but you've moved out of the central aspect of running the business and kind of being responsible for all the operations. So tell us a little bit about just how that feels to you today, to be next door.
Well, we love our neighbors and the land and what's happening there. It's as we've said before, it has been a dream come true to have this happen. We had, in our succession plan, we had hopes that maybe our children would be interested in taking over what we had begun here 30 years ago. And like many farm children, maybe they watched us work really, really hard and decided to do some other things rather than come and take over the farm work and programs and tours and all that was happening at Windhorse at the time. And then we were sort of on the market. People came to us from various places saying, we hear Windhorse might be for sale and we have this idea and that idea. And nothing felt just right until Ullnoweg approached us. And oddly enough, as Windhorse means coincidence, one of the members on our the Windhorse Education Foundation was on the board of directors of Ullnoweg. And when he heard our aspiration, which we thought was completely impossible, that this be moved back into the hands of the Indigenous people, he said, I might be able to help make that happen. And so he did. So it's been a fantastic transition. We sat in circle for over 2 years in conversation with members of Ullnoweg and feel very happy about what had happened and now what is happening. It's a vibrant community and they're doing wonderful things. Many, many people coming to the land that we've never seen before. We had never welcomed. So it feels like it's really, truly come into its own as a place of healing and nurturing and kind of natural leadership.
What hopes or vision do you still have for that, even in that transition? Having kind of supported that foundation and stewarded the land for as long as you did, how are you looking at that when you say coming into its own? What hopes do you have for that at this point?
Well, I've been involved in a lot of business throughout my life, and for the last 46 years with Margaret, and have had mixed results. Had a lot of failure and some success. And what's interesting to me now is that the successes weren't always that great, and the failures were not always that terrible. And what has been consistent in my life through this and with our lives here, and is still that way, is planting trees and other wild plants and providing water and food and housing and protection for lots of wild beings. And that continues. That's kind of a quiet thing from a human point of view. We can do that without anybody even noticing. So that's maybe that's a little bit of where we've been and where we are now.
Jim, you've shared something to me with many, but as you say that about success and failure, one of your teachings around nature and what it's always doing and experimenting and so on and what a great teacher it is. What has the forest taught you about business over those years of looking after it and being entrepreneurial as you are?
I think patience. The forest is always changing. My life is always changing. everything in the world is changing. And it's easy to get caught up in what changes do we like and what changes do we not like. But I think one of the teachings of the land is that like and dislike are irrelevant.
Hmm. Yeah, and how do you think you were able to apply that into your business operations?
Well, I haven't been able to apply that very well. I've really been caught in this prison of binary thinking, of right and wrong, good and bad, success and failure. And I suppose my aspiration is to escape from that prison of binary thinking. And the land is the main teacher of that.
Yeah, both of you have always shared how the land is the essential host and inviting people to be met wherever they are. And I've always just found deep connection in that space with the people and nature around me. Margaret, you mentioned this transition being an expression of deeper healing, and that opportunity coming maybe to greater fruition in this transition as well. And you've both often taught leadership as a healing practice as well. Can you share a little bit more about the teaching that you've offered at Windhorse over the years and maybe your view on leadership?
I'll try. Well, fundamentally, leadership begins at home within oneself. And my personal leadership modality has been meditation practice. I've felt that in order to lead myself, I need to know myself. And meditation practice of just sitting and being with this person and getting to know her well has been a way of healing her and getting to know all of her parts so that all those parts that still pop up whenever they're being binary, they're known, they're friends. And I think that's the main thing, is making friends with oneself is, for me, has been the most powerful way of learning how to be a learning leader. So, and a somewhat healed leader. I've been doing it for 50 years, and I feel like I'm just beginning to kind of calm down a bit, enough so that I can start to see others for who they are instead of who I think they are. And that process of seeing me as I am allows me to see you as you are, hopefully. So that's the practice. And I consider that to be it's reflected in nature all the time. When I was very sick with cancer a few years ago, my greatest friend at the time was two big oak trees that stood outside the front door at the farmhouse. And I would look to them for an example of leadership, an example of always being there and being steady, and also being flexible, moving, and being present. It was always a way of waking up to those qualities within myself. And I think was greatly healing, and still is greatly healing. I'm looking at two beautiful big oak trees right in front of the powerhouse and sort of going, hey, how you doing? And kind of having that same feeling that resonates as tremendous leaders in my life and healing in my life.
Beautiful. Thank you. Jim, what would you add to that? And how might your view be similar or different?
Well, I wish I had said that. Perfect. And I think, continuing on from that is what Margaret is implying is seeing that leadership in every being, seeing that every being is a natural leader. If leader means, as Margaret says, knowing oneself. So it's that kind of living in a place of tranquility and insight. And the ducks have a lot to teach about that, and the beaver, and the swamp milkweed, and the wild bees.
Well, I was thinking about this earlier in your questions, Nick, about leadership and where leadership happened in our lives, and one of them was at ALIA, the Authentic Leadership in Action program. There was a women's program called Coming Into Your Own, and they talked a lot about feminine leadership, and it kind of was a question for me because leader, as a horticulturist, has always been in a tree. You choose a leader, you cut back the other branches in order to have one be the leader. It's a very singular approach and seemed to be sort of the dominant culture is like there's a leader. But what Jim's saying and what we've experienced so much is that there is a leader in every seat, be it a tree or if you're sitting in a circle with people. Everybody in that circle has something completely unique in their experience and their ability. Sometimes it's the silent one. It's the person whose presence of just fully being is a leadership modality. And it's learning to appreciate that everyone is a leader. It's just important to look maybe a little more closely at some people to see it and sometimes to encourage that quality. I'm sure with your teams, you're doing that all the time. And encouraging people to be everything that they are and not trying to be something other than what they are. And obviously that's what's so great about nature. Like when I felt really freaked out about myself or life or what's going on and walking around and being in the forest and see, the oak is not trying to be a hemlock. And there's so much that nature has to teach us about being a river, being a tree, being Margaret, being Nick, being Jim, that we all have something to contribute.
Yes, I've loved that perspective and agree that the container provided by the land there has been such a great teacher for so many and makes learning more accessible in many ways, I think. Almost just being immersed in it without even knowing what you're taking in from what's around you. Nick, what questions are you sitting with that you'd like to ask Jim and Margaret today?
Well, I'm enjoying where this is going and so far. And for those of you who may not, or for our guests or viewers who might not be so familiar with your story and how you've come to, I guess, bless our province with your presence and leadership, how did you end up here in Nova Scotia? What led you to Windhorse? Do you mind sharing that story?
We traveled here first in 1977 with our teacher, Jugim Trungpa, when he was exploring the possibility of moving the center of our Shambhala organization here. And then again in the spring of 1979. And later, in August of 1979, Margaret and I came here with two other couples to start really to begin the Buddhist church in Nova Scotia, which became the Shambhala Center. So that's how we came to Nova Scotia, 44 years ago, 45 years ago. And then we knew, I think we knew we didn't want to live in Halifax, that we wanted to move out into the forest. But it was important in terms of our work here that we stay in Halifax for a decade, which we did, and then moved to Windhorse, what became Windhorse, in 1990. And that actually was the result of a business failure, which turned out to not be so terrible. So we were bankrupt. Our company went bankrupt. We had personally guaranteed the loans of the company, so we were bankrupt personally. And it was at that point that we landed here at Windhorse, which was a result that was far better than any business success could have led to. And it's been a lot of work to kind of come from that place. And we've been supported by our friends, by our neighbors, and by all of the beings of this place.
Wow. You share, sorry, go ahead.
Jim has this kind of romantic, that he just kind of jumped right over the years of depression and how could I have done that? And walking the paths of Carol Wenzel in the forest, kind of wondering what went wrong. It was so hard for him. So when we talk about this being a place of healing, I think this guy could probably speak fully to that topic. But the forest really did. I watched my husband go from being very depressed and very unhappy and really beating himself up over what happened, which we were in the midst of a recession. There were many factors that led to this. But to watch him be in the forest and then kind of come back and be restored. He was the first restoration project that happened at Windhorse Farm. And you can see now he's a beautiful and full and great guy. He's can look at that as now in a maybe too romantic way, but he can also look at it when reminded by me, who always does, that it was hard. And it was that journey is what really kind of made him who he is today.
You've mentioned how the land and nature has helped, and meditation helped yourself on your own leadership journey, and so how have you used that, I guess, as a reflection of your own teachings of those who surround you? So those who visited Windhorse, and what sort of leadership training have you adopted or I guess done for others, and how did you find your way down that path?
Well, thank you. That's a great question. And I think one of the fortunate things that happened to us as soon as we sort of grounded, and we had two little kids, and we were, trying to put groceries, we weren't buying anything. We were kind of growing our own food, and just started to build gardens and permaculture gardens, and take care of ourselves the best we could. On all levels, psychologically and physically. And as we started to do things, other people became interested. I'm a horticulturist by training, and Jim is an ecologist and a forester. So we kind of found our own, part of our leadership was just kind of discovering our own natural resources, which we had both not used for a long time in the city. And then people kind of looked at us and went, oh, organic farming, permaculture, forestry with horses. What's going on over there? And so people just came to us and wanted to learn. So we had these kind of internships where young people would come and live with us for 6 months of the year. I did the horticulture, farming, gardening aspect of things, a program called Seed to Seed. And Jim did the forestry piece. And another group would come in the fall and they would work through the winter. And so we both began to teach both kind of whatever we had learned from our own experience and our own practices, but mostly the land practices, and just in a very, we'll say, Shambhala way of not being overtly teaching meditation, but teaching through how we were approaching the land and contemplative practices within gardening and growing food and saving seeds, and mindfulness and awareness was just part of our lifestyle that both of us taught in the ways we would share with these young people. We actually turned out to be the real beneficiaries there of leadership, of learning from these young people. Every one of them is extraordinary, and many of them have landed in our lives in this neighborhood or right here in Lunenburg County, practicing forestry and selling seeds and growing things and creating good food for people, and in growing their communities. So it's been a really, we have been the beneficiaries from that activity. So it's kind of, I don't know if that answers your question, Nick, but it sort of feels like what leadership, the way we felt leadership was really important, was like there not being one leader, but there were so many leaders. And now that's become community. And we are proud of that. We're really joyful that that's happening here in Lunenburg County. We like it a lot. In fact, throughout the whole province, there's now, when we started, there were only, I think, 2 organic growers. Norbert, who's still an amazing organic grower and a model to many, and his family. And so now there are many, as you know, if you go to the farmers market on Saturdays in Halifax, you'll see all of our friends and family there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Those principles have certainly nourished you and many others. Given the current context that our world is in and the various challenges that we're facing economically, environmentally, and so on, share a little bit about kind of your view of what's important now and how those practices are helpful individually and collectively to sustain us through challenge and help us figure out how to flourish and thrive.
I'm definitely a follower of Angela Davis and her statement, do what you can where you are. I have spent a lot of time in my life thinking that scale was important. That if you could do something on a big scale. But I've really come to feel that scale is almost irrelevant. But if one really inquires of plants, animals, including people, what's actually needed here, right now? And what do I have the capacity to relate to? What can I offer? What do I have the capacity to offer that would meet the needs of beings in this place? So that's more the question. I don't know that there's an answer, but that's the kind of question that I think is relevant. It's not to say that there is not as much or more importance to what's happening in Uganda. But I don't have the capacity from here to do much about that other than pray, other than offer that kind of thoughts of compassion. But right here in this community, in this neighborhood, with this family and these friends, I can actually have an effect. So I think for me now, at this point in my life, doing what I can where I am is how I can affect the world.
Planting trees.
Talking to the beavers.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Margaret?
No, I thought about it. I thought it was I think it's a great question. And I thought of like who my models are, who are the women in particular that have been my leaders. And one of them has been obviously Pema Chodron, who has been up at Gampo Abbey and is a tremendous teacher about how to live at this moment. Her recent book is How to Live is How to Die. And it's an extraordinary teaching on leaving this world, living this world as you will leave this world. And another one is Joanna Macy, who you may know as a tremendous environmental activist and scholar, Berkeley, California, in her 90s, who a quote from her that I found was, "The most remarkable feature of this historic moment in time is we are on the way to destroying our world. We've actually been on this way for quite a while. But what's extraordinary about this time is like we're waking up after a millennia of sleeping and realizing what's happening." And there's something so striking about her and sort of meeting the despair that many people feel at this time. And instead of being pulled down by it, it's connecting with that despair and finding that as your stepping stones, your lead into what you can do, as Jim was talking about. Everybody has something that they can do. And it's for us to discover what that is. And for me, it's really about growing food. I think it's a really important time to save seeds and grow food and feed people and love people in that way by nourishing them in whatever way we can, in a physical way, and then of course in an emotional way. I think all of the great leaders of this time, Martin Luther King and Mandela and all of these extraordinary beings, that has been their central message, is love. I grew up on the Beatles.
Little hippie vibe coming back there. I'm sure it was you that introduced me to Joanna Macy's work, and I've often resonated with the quote that sunsets are beautiful too, and that she talks about kind of the need to kind of find that beauty even amongst challenge.
Well, it's an exciting
Nick and I
time.
work.
It's a very
Go ahead.
exciting time for all of us to be living in right now. And I think this kind of podcast and what you're doing with these podcasts is finding people who have messages to share that will help others. This is a community right here online, and that all of us can do this in our own way, in our own communities. of helping each other, listening to each other, learning from each other. And our particular large part of our community are plant communities, so we do that here. But I'm sure in the city, there are city communities of power and relevance and resonance that are where I think you two are really benefiting a lot of people by doing this, bringing people into community to support each other and help each other during these very difficult times. I'm very appreciative of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. As you know, Nick and I work a lot with business owners, and often in a context of succession, and for many, it's very challenging to let go and to transition from an identity that was related to one way of being in the world and in their business and into whatever will come next. A lot of your practice and the essence of it is really around letting go. And even in this transition, my personal attachment to Windhorse Farm has been something that seems a little bit counterintuitive to a Buddhist retreat center to have that kind of attachment to it. My question, though, is really around that transition for you and what letting go has felt like, both from a challenging point of view and maybe how it's been liberating in other ways.
Yeah, I think I'd like to answer that in two ways. One, there are things that have been very easy around Windhorse, around this transition to let go of. Monitoring the accounts payable has been real easy to let go of. Protecting the wild land is, I'm not ready to let go of that. I feel really fierce as a protector of the wild beings here. No one's particularly threatening that, but just in case anyone wants to. The other way was this morning, actually. Margaret and I, in our check-in, we do a check-in with each other over tea every morning. And this morning, part of the check-in and conversation was around, will we be able to give away all of our things by the time we die? Or will we just burden our children with having to burn all this stuff? And so we actually started to think about, what about that piece? Are we ready to give it away? We aspire to give away everything before we die. But we don't know how long we're going to live, and we're discovering that some of these seemingly meaningless things we have attachment to that maybe we didn't think about. So, there's something around that's very current for us. So watch your doorstep.
Right.
Or come on down. We got something for everybody.
Do you have an extra pot?
Margaret, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah. I have never sort of identified as much as being Windhorse Farm as I think Jim has. Maybe it's a male thing. I hate to be so male-female in this conversation, but I kind of and for many, the face of Windhorse Farm was Jim Drescher. And I was kind of, in the background. And so maybe in part that's why it's easier for me. But it's definitely a part of Buddhist training is sort of recognizing where your ego is, where you're holding on to who you think you are. And being a co-director of Windhorse Farm has been one of my tags. And but I have felt very very easy with letting it go. It's surprising to me. It's sort of like when I got cancer. I was kind of surprised by myself. I surprise myself all the time. I was sort of like, it was just sort of like the next thing for me. It wasn't like, oh shit, I've got cancer. It was sort of like, oh, okay. How am I going to relate to this? What am I going to do now? What is this going to be like? And it was sort of the same with what happened at Windhorse. It was just such a positive thing that this was moved into the hands. An eagle is flying by right now. It just felt like nothing, it makes me emotional to say it, just nothing better could happen than for this to be given back to the people that it was stolen from. So there's so much joy in that and so much support and positivity to it that every day I walk across the land to go to a part of Windhorse that we still have gardens and forest land. And I just look and feel and just treasure that this is the moment in time when this place has come back to its, I almost said rightful owners, but they don't believe any more in ownership than anybody should. They're caretakers and stewards of the land. So it all feels really very positive to me. And now we're moving into more of a freshness of being and like, okay, now we've got, I'm not worried about cancer anymore. We don't have to worry about taking care of Windhorse Farm. What now? What's alive and what's fresh and what's purposeful? Preparing for our death. We're 75 and 80 years old, so it's in our future, and also preparing for this very moment that we're in and living fully into it. So it's a very, very powerful and meaningful time for both of us and for both of us together. We get to spend some time together that we've been kind of putting on hold in a way with all the other things going on in our lives. So I hope you two young men have as much good fortune as we have had. I truly hope that.
Thank you, and it's been great fortune in getting to know you and getting to know Windhorse for sure. It's been a really important part of my life, as you know. I had a recent conversation with a leader in the community sector who talked about succession as an opportunity for strategic transformation, not just continuity. And I really loved that. We often think it's about perpetuating what has been rather than an opportunity for creating something new. And I just love what you're saying about that freshness and what is alive now and those questions. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Deeply appreciative of the wisdom that you've shared in this conversation and sharing your story. Is there anything that we haven't asked you today that you feel you would like to add to the conversation?
Thanks to both of you. I think you've done a great job of provoking us. One thing that I would like to add is and I think that our work now, and I could extend that and really to say that all of our work as human beings is to we talked about letting go of the land or letting go of a project or letting go is really to let go of our habits, whatever habits they are. We all have quite a collection of habits. And freedom really means not habituated. And the one that I'm facing most strongly right now is the habit of projects. I've spent almost my entire life having projects. And so now I think my instruction to myself and my instruction from Margaret and my instruction from my meditation teacher is to enough, no more projects, which sounds easy and might be easy for some people. And it's a deeply ingrained habit for me. And so I think I could even make a project out of ending all my projects. But that's that's for me. But each person has a list of habits and maybe has some kind of keystone habits, and those are worth discarding.
Good advice. I like that definition of freedom. Margaret, any parting thoughts from you today?
Well, what I think about has been so valuable for both of us, and it really does fit in with what you were just saying. And that is that I think it's really helpful for everyone to have some sort of a contemplative practice. I think it's a useful thing. And my particular choice was meditation. But there are many different ways of having something where you can learn about yourself, some sort of practice, daily practice, where you can just fully be with yourself and get to know yourself and make friends, that I think is really a useful tool for living a life well and making yourself available to yourself, knowing yourself, and therefore being able, I think, to be in a more sustainable friendship with others. And be Tai Chi, or it could be contemplative walking, or it could just be tea practice, just mindfulness awareness practice. I think would be very helpful. So it's the only other thing that I can think of to add to the conversation.
Time for me to get back there for a watercourse walk.
Yes, for sure.
Well, I hope I know we'll have an opportunity to interview you two.
Yeah.
Because you're two of the most interesting people that have not been interviewed on your podcast. Maybe you'll let Jim and I the opportunity. We would love to.
We'll flip the questions around. One of the things I know I get asked a lot about the land there is its accessibility to others to come down and visit and walk through the forest and whatnot. Is that something that is an open invitation for people? What does that look like under Ullnoweg's stewardship?
In general, the invitation is open for people to come. They ask that if you're coming, like particularly if you're coming with a group or several people, to call and just work it out, because there might be some things happening that where it wasn't a good idea. But generally speaking, yes, it's open, and the forest welcomes people who tread softly.
Perfect. Thank you for that, and thank you very much to both of you for this time today. I really appreciate seeing you and sharing your wisdom with our audience. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Yeah, thanks.